After the developers of Final Fantasy XVI recently released a swath of new information, a lot of discourse has been happening around the internet regarding the different facets of the interviews and gameplay that they revealed. One thing that is getting talked about is the accessibility of Final Fantasy XVI. Pieces like the article on Eurogamer by Geoffrey Bunting or YouTube videos by LauraKBuzz and James Stephanie Sterling are discussing what it means for a game to be accessible and explaining why the Final Fantasy XVI system is a poor implementation. You see, in Final Fantasy XVI there are difficulty rings that have been developed for this game instead of the standard difficulty options. The set of 5 rings all have different functions that all work in some way to make the game easier, which by extension makes the game more accessible for disabled gamers who just want to experience the game. I will say up front that fundamentally I agree that the system the devs implemented is flawed and it could be better, but I don't believe that it's as bad as these pieces are making it out to be. I think that there are legitimate game design decisions that I think had good intentions, even if those intentions don't really pan out. Except that gamer pride thing. Yoshi P can hold that back. So first, I need to get some things straight and give some background. In the article by Bunting and the video by Stephanie Sterling, they say that there are 3 accessory slots, so this means you can only equip 3 rings of the 5. They're actually wrong, you can only equip 2. Laura actually does point this out and makes the case that this is even worse. So what if someone needs more rings for their disabilities? Now, this is where my first point of contention comes up. Yes, limiting the rings that the player can use will fundamentally make the game harder, especially if you have multiple disabilities. However, I would argue that the rings the developers provide don't actually have to be equipped for basically anybody to beat the game. Now, this isn't me trying to be ableist, so hear me out. You see, the 5 rings have 5 functions. 1 automates Torgal, your AI companion. 1 automates healing, so it will use a potion when you're low health. 1 increases the dodge window, making it easier to dodge. 1 completely automates dodging. And finally, 1 automates combos to 1 button press. Now, looking at these rings individually, you can see how each one may provide some benefit to a person with a certain disability, whether it's auto potions for the visually impaired, or things like auto combo and AI automation for people with motor control issues. However, I have to ask the question, when you have auto dodge and auto combo on, is there really a need for more ring? Now, what I mean by that is there's a clear hierarchy of aid that these rings provide. You don't need to use Torgal to beat the game, for instance. I think the average gamer playing this game will fail to fully utilize them the same way people fail to fully utilize Atreus in God of War. Also, do you need larger dodge windows if you have auto dodge on? The game is apparently dodging for you, so why would you need more time? Also, is auto potion necessary if you aren't taking damage because you're dodging all of it? And here's what Yoshi P had to say about this in an IGN interview. If you put all of them on, then basically the player doesn't have to do anything anymore. And so even with the 2 strongest ones, like the Ring of Timely Evasion, and then maybe Timely Strikes, when you get it down there, even then you still have to press square, and you still have to get out of the way of some things. Even with those 2 most powerful accessories on, you're still actually part of the action. Now here's where my opinion almost definitely differs from the critics. That is that I actually agree with the intention of Yoshi P here to some degree. He's basically saying that at some fundamental level, he thinks it's a good idea to tell the players, hey, this is a video game we made and we want you to engage with all parts of it to at least some level so you can enjoy it. To push the players to challenge themselves, if even a little bit, to improve and get better. Now, this might be a biased opinion since I enjoy getting better and improving, and I don't have any disabilities, but I also like to think that that's fundamentally what differentiates video games from other media like movies. If you want the game to play itself and watch the story, that's fine. I just have to question why you're paying $70 to watch the cutscenes when after the release they'll all be up on YouTube. Or better yet, you can watch a Let's Play or a streamer and you can enjoy all the content in context and have the experience of running through it yourself without having to touch the controller. For a game to fundamentally be a game, there has to be some failure state, and by extension, some challenge. This isn't me just saying get good either. Like, I legitimately think that with the absolute strongest rings on, pretty much anyone, disabled or not, who wants to will be able to beat the game. Depending on how strong auto dodge really is, that is. Which also, I think that's another problem with this argument. You see, this whole argument is predicated on the fact that these rings are not enough for disabled people because they can only equip 2, when in reality, disabled people haven't played the game yet. The game isn't out. So in that sense, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. And I will concede, I could be wrong. Maybe some people out there with a specific set of disabilities would want to play this game and the rings provided would not provide enough benefit. But only time will tell. For now though, I think that this argument is a little weak, as it ignores the fact that some rings are just outright more powerful than others and make others redundant, and it ignores the fact that we don't really know if there will be anyone who is incapable of beating the game who actually wants to because of this ring limitation. Now on to the next point. Both videos and the article articulate that these rings are taking up accessory slots that can be used for other things, and it's kinda shit. What I mean by that is a normal person who doesn't need these rings will be able to equip more cool accessories that will augment their build with more damage or some other effect that a disabled gamer won't be able to use because 2 of the slots are filled up at all times with these accessories, leaving only 1 for cool accessory drops. And this just feels bad. You could point out that the accessory slots probably fulfill a minor role in the gameplay loop, with leveling up and upgrading skills being more core to the experience, but that doesn't change the fact that it still feels bad, no matter how small. However, I do have one argument I can make that I do think plays devil's advocate for the devs a little bit. You see, as I said earlier, these accessories are more intended for gamers who are new to the action RPG genre, who might be coming from an old FF turn-based game, or might be new gamers in general. As such, the devs created these tools to help them get going, to dip their toes into action RPGs. And ultimately, as Yoshi Pia said, they want players to stop using the rings as they get more comfortable and engaged with this gameplay, which in theory would increase their enjoyment of the game as they learn the systems. As such, having the difficulty options take up accessory slots actually incentivizes people without disabilities to drop the rings eventually so that they can slot in a new accessory. Let's say you needed auto potion because you kept forgetting to heal, and a cool ring just dropped that, gives your build 10% more damage. You might have that thought that, hey, I really want this 10% more damage over auto heal. I can just get better. I can try to improve so I don't need this auto potion accessory so I can do more damage. And so the system inherently motivates players to try to turn up the difficulty setting in a way that menu-based difficulty doesn't. When the game's just on easy mode, it's totally up to the player to just say, yeah, this feels a little easy, I might turn it up. And as such, it doesn't really push the players to try to improve. And this doesn't change the fact that it sucks for players who can't just get good, but also means that the system could, at least in theory, potentially improve the experiences of players who might just need a little push to challenge themselves and learn the combat system. And so I think there is a bit of a trade-off that's being overlooked. There are better systems, but fundamentally, while it is lessening the experience of some players, it could be improving the experience of others. I mean, this is another hot topic game in this space, but if you look at a game like Elden Ring, which doesn't really have difficulty settings and has its own inherent problem, especially with disabled gamers, but I do think one of the reasons why the game is so popular is because it kind of forces your average gamer to improve themselves, which is something that a lot of video games don't push their players to do, unless it's like a fighting game or something more competitive. And even then, you need to have that kind of competitive streak to you, which not everyone has, and that's fine. And while that sucks for some people, that little push to make them be better actually makes them enjoy the game more, if that makes sense. And so this game kind of has a mix of both, where the accessory system kind of pushes the player to try to improve themselves while also giving an easy difficulty for players that may not be able to. So with all that said, there are some things that even I, as an able-bodied person who plays too many video games, don't like about this system. First and foremost, I hate inventory clutter. Personally, I hate to even pre-order, because a lot of times you get those pre-order items and they're always overtuned and they just waste space in my inventory forever, and I hate it. I have a feeling that these rings will be similar, and if these were just options in a menu, that wouldn't be a problem. Also, I have to kind of agree that there are better systems that exist, like Nier Automata, where the options are basically accessories, but they don't have any noticeable impact on your loadout because they're so cheap. And in the grand scheme of things, this would likely be a better solution. However, that does have some drawback, like I mentioned earlier, where the motivation to drop the accessories is reduced when there is no real cost to it. And finally, personally, I also do think that this feels like the devs trying to reinvent the wheel with no good reason. And because of that, this has been under a lot of scrutiny. A lot of the points in these journalistic pieces are completely valid, and fundamentally, a simple difficulty selection would have had better reception by the general population. I mean, these rings aren't super intuitive to begin with. Like, what's going to happen if someone, say, picks normal mode instead of story, notices these OP rings, thinks they're a pre-order bonus, and just equips them? They'll have them equipped all game, and they'll probably just assume that the game is stupid easy if they don't look it up, which is the total opposite of what the devs originally intended. So the system itself is somewhat flawed. Plus, Here's another personal thing. There is a hard difficulty mode called Final Fantasy mode in this game, but it only unlocks after New Game Plus. And as I said, as a person who plays video games way too much, my fear is that on my first playthrough, the gameplay is going to be kind of easy and uninteresting. And it kind of sucks that I have to play through the game once just to play the game mode that I want to play, all because the head developer doesn't want to do difficulty modes. And so sometimes the most treaded path is the safest, simplest, and most likely the best solution. And so ultimately, I have a similar feeling as the journalists. I do believe that the system had some good intentions with trying to get people to challenge and better themselves and enjoy the game more. However, it still leaves something to be desired. Even if ultimately it isn't an accessibility issue for disabled gamers once the game releases, it still has drawbacks that I think outweigh the benefits, and there are other systems that exist that are simpler and probably better. Why should a disabled person play with one effective accessory slot? Why do I have to deal with inventory clutter? Why complicate something that really doesn't have to be complicated? Like, you can just trust the players of this single-player game to make their own decisions on what difficulty they want to play. But I digress. With that said though, I do think I'm a little more positive about the system than these journalists, and I mostly attribute that to some differing perspectives. Based on some of the things that they talk about, it feels more like they just read about the system, saw the obvious flaws, and wanted to discuss it with their communities. And I do think that the flaws warrant discussion. But after you take a deeper look, I also think that the system isn't as bad as it's being portrayed. There's a lot more nuance to their talking points that they let on, and that's something that I wanted to add to the discussion. As I've said multiple times in this video, that doesn't mean I love the system, or that I don't believe that games need to be accessible. Rather, my belief is that once the game releases and people of all backgrounds play it, the general consensus will be that the accessory difficulty system is a flawed but ultimately okay system.